Good morning, all.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so just update for you guys. The assessment will be taken at the end of the session. So just switch where we are going to start with the session first, and once we are done with the session today, we will be going with the assessment. Okay. So the agenda that we have today, as decided, is entirely focusing on the RESTful services and the implementation of the same with the help of the ASP.NET MVC uh, web APIs based on .NET Core. So starts with the web API 2.0. What are its benefits? How it compares to the other similar frameworks in .NET like WCF and ASP.NET Core itself. The RESTful architecture also is very important to understand because web API is based entirely on that. And then the implementation, where we'll see how to set up the web API 2 project, how to create the simple web API endpoint that returns data in JSON format, the best practices for designing the web API endpoints, introduction to various HTTP methods like get, post, put, delete, which are heavily used for CRUD operations to be performed via the APIs. Ultimately, how to use them in web API endpoints is the next thing. And then definitely you'll be building some application based on the concepts. And in the process, we are also going to touch upon the routing and the parameter binding with respect to web APIs. Okay, so let's start with the first section. Maybe before we actually start with web APIs, let's first of all discuss about the RESTful architecture because web API is based on this architecture, and then we'll take up the other things. Make sense? So anybody knows what REST stands for?
Representational state transfer.
That's right, representational state transfer. And what exactly it talks about?
So it does
One of
some set of guidelines. So we have to follow that guideline so that it follows the RESTful.
right. So it's a kind of a architectural pattern, usually that is used when designing the web services, right? HTTP services or web services. Web services were created long time back, basically to allow cross-platform applications communicate with each other. But those web services heavily depended on the XML and the SOAP protocol, which were bulky, right? Because simply to define customer ID, I need to have customer ID as tag, closing tag, and then in between the actual data. So XML makes your messaging bulky. It was good as far as both your client and servers were kind of full-fledged framework being used for the applications running on the full-fledged computer systems, where the computer systems had lots of resources on them. But eventually, the requirements in the market changed, and many of the computing requirements were then being fulfilled with the handheld devices like tabs, mobile phones, the other smart devices, etc. With these kind of devices coming in, we actually required the services to be implemented and used in such a way where the data transfer happens in compressed format. Whatever relevant information is there, that only gets transferred. Okay. And basically, we wanted to make the entire communication as lightweight as possible. This also was targeting to maximize the compatibility of heterogeneous systems with each other. With XML and SOAP, the clients were required to know what XML is, what SOAP is. Without having the idea of SOAP protocol, simple object access protocol, communicating with web APIs or hosting the web APIs was not possible. So looking beyond that, so that the compatibility can be enhanced in such a way that even if the certain platform is not aware of the formatting protocol or something like SOAP, still it should be able to communicate, probably by providing its own parsing logic into it, or maybe by using some library if it is available for that platform. Right. So it was supposed to be more flexible. Okay. So that's where basically the RESTful architecture was introduced. This makes your APIs even more scalable, more maintainable, and more interoperable as well. We started with interoperability, but yeah, the architecture has been designed in such a way that it makes it more scalable and more maintainable also. Right. And as you rightly said, it is built upon the set of principles that are responsible for providing you the guidance with respect to the design and the interaction of components within a distributed system. Right. The main target over here while designing these principles was to provide and promote the simplicity, scalability, and ease of integration of the components across systems, which may be heterogeneous or homogeneous, anything. So what are those principles is the next thing that we need to understand. Right? Let's put down our first principle here. It is something which is based on client server architecture. Now, what client server architecture is? Simple question it is. Primarily, there is one server that hosts your service, and there are clients, number of clients, which probably send a request to the server to get some work done. Server processes that request and provides the response back to the client. Right?
Yes.
So what REST does in this? REST basically separates the concerns of the client, that is user interface, and the server, that is something to take care of data storage and processing, which includes your data access layer and business logic layer. This division actually allows for the completely independent evolution of both the client and the server components, as long as the interface or the contract between them is consistent. Contract means what I am as a client expecting and what someone as a server is providing. There has to be some mutual consent between that, right? As far as that contract is consistent, the interaction is going to be provided and the independent evolution will be possible at all the levels. If contract changes, probably then the evolution may get hampered. There will be breaking changes, which means either the client or the server needs to be changed to be compatible with the client, right? Next is another important point, that is services are supposed to be stateless. So we usually call this feature as statelessness. What is statelessness? We don't maintain the state of the data on the sending side. Client doesn't maintain the state once it dispatches the request to server. Server doesn't maintain the state after dispatching the response back to the client. Simply, each request and response must contain and carry all the necessary information for the other party. Right? So when request is going, the request must carry all the data, all the information for the server so that server can fulfill the request. Similarly, when server sends the response back, the response must contain and carry all the data that probably is required by the client for taking it further. Server should not be storing any reference to the client, what is called as client context, across the request at all. This approach actually simplifies the overall server design and helps in improving the scalability and reliability. Understand? Because if you are storing some information about the client, this will make your system more tightly coupled and the independent evolution will also get hampered. Scalability also will be limited in that case. Yes or no?
Yes.
Is it clear?
Yes.
Third principle is cacheability. What is cacheability? Ability to cache responses received from any RESTful endpoint or RESTful API, if required, should be possible to be cached. And there, the server must basically provide the information whether the response for a certain endpoint can be cached or not. There has to be control in the hands of the server because server better knows what data is cacheable, what data is non-cacheable. Means it needs to be retrieved every time fresh from the server. So server side must have the control on letting the client know whether the response of this RESTful endpoint is cacheable or not. If it is cacheable, then client must be able to store the responses locally, maybe in memory, maybe persistently on some uh, hard drive or maybe local storage or something like that, and reuse that data for the similar request or maybe the request for the same resource or same data, which will help in reducing the server round trips from the client. If it is the same data I'm going to receive, why should I go back to the server again and again? Why not store it locally and retrieve it locally itself? That will enhance the response time. So in turn, it enhances the performance. Also reduces the network traffic because the number of round trips will reduce. Usually this is implemented when you see the data is not changing a lot. Usually the master data doesn't change a lot or doesn't change very frequently, right? Like if we talk about department and employee data may keep on changing comparatively more quickly as compared to that of department data. Departments once established will be having the same data for long, right? Until and unless a new department is not created or department location is not changed or department is not closed, right? Which is very rare. I'm not saying it's not applicable, but it's rare. Yes or no?
Yes.
Next principle is uniform interface. What is uniform interface? Whatever interaction that happens between client and the server must follow the uniform and consistent set of constraints or rules. If there is no consistency or in terms of constraints and rules, probably somewhere the reliability will be at stake. What are those constraints? Let's list them down. First is resource identification. Which resource actually is being requested? Right? Each resource must be uniquely identified. And how do we do that for RESTful APIs? Having a uniform resource identifier, or what we call as URI. Make sense? Every web service or web API, every single endpoint has unique URI mapped to it. Yes or no? So that we are sure shot all the time which resource we are interacting with or we are requesting for. Understood?
Yes.
Yes. Next is resource manipulation. Sorry. Through representation. What is it? Clients will be responsible to manipulate resources. How? By exchanging some representation at their end with the server. What kind of representation will be there? Usually for RESTful APIs, we use JSON, and as a backup, if JSON is not very comfortable or if there is legacy system being upgraded, we go for XML as well. Lightweight XML, but containing only the relevant information, no additional information like schema or something that goes to the server. Minimum required information should be there in this resource data, whether it is represented as JSON or XML. So whatever data goes to server would be in the form of either JSON or XML, which are typical web standard representations understood by most of the devices, right? Yes.
Yes.
Next is self-descriptive messages. The messages which are exchanged between the client and server must include the minimum metadata about themselves that describes the receiving party about how to get this message processed. Understand? Minimum information is required. Like if I just say Sakit Karne, what you will understand? If we are meeting for the first time and in the first meeting itself, I just say Sakit Karne, what you will understand? Whatever you understand, whether it is my name or something else, that probably will be based on your assumption. Is it guaranteed that your assumption will be always correct? I might be representing Sakit Karnik also, right? But if I say I am Sakit Karnik, this I am adds more meaning to it. You don't need to make any assumptions. My words contain the minimum required metadata about itself as well, right? So that's where JSON can be pretty helpful. You have key value pairs where key can represent your metadata and value can represent your actual data. Does that make sense? Like name, colon, Sakit Karni. It says it all. Yes or no?
Yes.
So that's self-descriptive messages. Next is hypermedia as the engine of application state or app state. What is it? All the time, whenever I'm sharing some data in the response back to the client, do you think that this data will be self-sufficient all the time? It might have some relations or related data also. Yes or no? If that is the case, how I make my client aware of that? Okay, this is the data, but there is some related data to it as well, which might be useful. Whether client uses the related data or not, that is up to client. But I should be letting the client know that there is some related data as well. How do I do that? By sharing some links to the related resources, which will allow the clients to navigate the application state transitions in case if they are interested in additional information or related information. Understood? Yes.
Yes.
Then the fifth principle of RESTful services come in. Layered system. This should be easy. What is it? Layered system or tiered system? Your RESTful services can be set up in a way that they form multiple layers within the application, where each layer will be only aware of the other layer either above it or below it, not other layers. This will promote the separation of concerns, which further promotes the flexibility, scalability that allows components to be added or modified without affecting the entire system. Make sense? Tiered architecture is what we are talking about, basically. Separation of concerns, role-based implementations, like, okay, you are responsible for database interaction, you do only database interaction. I'm responsible for business logic, I'll take care of only business logic. Make sense or not? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Next is code on demand. Pretty much in pretty much popular as of now, as on these days. Code on demand. What it means? If required, the server can send some executable code back to the client as well in a web application scenario, this code can be JavaScript code, which can be the part of the response. And the client can provide some dynamic features into their implementations, right? This feature is not mandatory with REST. This is an optional feature, but yes, this is very useful and important feature in case if you're looking for the client to be completely dynamic one, and the dynamic behavior is supposed to be controlled and provided by server. So server can produce the code as per the need, and that code then can dynamically be sent back to the client, and then it gets executed on client itself. Yes or no?
Yes.
So what is the advantage of using RESTful pattern? Or in other words, what is the advantage of following these principles? It allows the creation of web services and APIs that are easy to develop, understand, manage, maintain, and integrate also. These principles promote loose coupling, separation of concerns, making it possible to evolve and scale the systems over the time without disrupting the existing functionality and existing architecture. Yes.
Yes.
Any questions here?
No.
So I hope this concept is entirely clear. How many of you have worked with SOAP web services? There will be quite similar features here as well, but SOAP services dependent heavily on SOAP messaging. Whatever
Yes.
the message used to go between the client and server was always a SOAP envelope message, right?
Right.
Which was a
And
complex structure.
post
Yeah, go
request.
ahead.
So it needs a XML, heavily used XMLs and message header,
Absolutely.
message, data
Correct.
contract. So
So not
everything
only XML,
wrapped up.
again, there was a predefined schema for that XML, which was
Right.
complex.
Right.
And if the client or the server, either of the party is not aware of this SOAP format, the interaction cannot be possible at all. Correct?
Right.
They cannot
So
just
it's
write
need a
their own
separate
parsers.
WSDL file and all.
Absolutely. So basically to generate the proxies, WSDL files were also required. So that made the entire implementation more complicated and more bulky. That is where the RESTful pattern basically work in and provides you lightweight interaction between the client and server by focusing mainly on the key aspects, the data and the minimum metadata about it.
Yes. It actually
No predefined structure.
maximally used HTTP protocols.
Correct.
Maximum use.
Correct. Because the HTTP protocol also is a very powerful one, which can let the server know about some of the metadata, like what kind of request it is.
Right.
It has got its own HTTP verbs like get, post, put, delete, which automatically defines what kind of request it is for the server. And based on which we can provide some actions. So why not leverage that power? And most importantly, this HTTP protocol is a lightweight protocol and understood and supported by or is compatible on multiple devices in the world. Any device which is connected to internet is capable of understanding what is HTTP. Even your smart speakers are aware of what is HTTP as they connect to internet. Any internet enabled device knows it. So this is a protocol which is compatible with variety of devices. So why not leverage its power? That's what RESTful principles basically kept in mind. And based on this, then the frameworks were created to allow us to create the RESTful services. Make sense?
Yes, true.
Now let's move on to the next point, that is Web API. Version 2 is what we will be targeting, but we need not say that it is version 2. While discussing it is just Web API. What Web API is? Web API is not a generic term, first of all. It's a Microsoft proprietary term, right? And for what? It is used by Microsoft for one of their own framework that has been designed to build the RESTful HTTP services, which can be consumed by wide variety of clients like web browsers, mobile devices, desktop applications, web applications, and other service-based applications also. It's a subset framework under ASP.NET framework. ASP.NET itself is a subset of .NET, right? And then provides a very, very powerful platform for creating the RESTful APIs pretty easily in no time. It builds entirely on the principles of REST and simplifies the process of building and consuming APIs.
Because when you are
It
saying the
provides,
desktop client as well, so
yeah.
basically that will be the Web API client used on desktop as a
It can be
consumed by the desktop, right?
any desktop client. It
Yeah,
can be
yeah.
a typical
So
WinForms application. It can be UWP. It can be MAUI based application. Anything.
right,
It even it can be a console based application also.
right. In all the cases, it will be act as a consumer of the web API.
Absolutely, absolutely. So how it sends the request to the web API is the only thing that needs to be looked into. And
Right, exactly.
practically, web API doesn't talk about who will be my client. It just talks about, okay, I'm providing you RESTful endpoint. If you know
Right.
how to call RESTful endpoint, you can call, you can integrate.
Right.
So my client can be any application written in any technology across the world. It can be Java based application. It can be PHP application, Python, Ruby application, whatever. Which platform, which language, and what type of application. It doesn't matter for the APIs. If you are aware of HTTP, you should be able to integrate. This is what API says. Okay. Got it?
Yes.
Now let's talk about the key features of Web API. The first one is HTTP based services. I need not talk much about it. We have already discussed. All services interact on HTTP channel. It can be secure HTTP as well. Uses the standard HTTP verbs get, post, put, delete. Whenever the interaction happens in two-way, where it actually works on the promises based implementation, which means even if there is a failure on the server side, the client is still informed that, okay, here is the response which contains the failure response. So basically it does it with the help of HTTP status codes. Before the data reaches the client, the status code reaches the client. Using status code, the client can always check whether my request was successful or failed. Is it important or not?
Yes, it is important.
Otherwise, it's like I called something and I don't know what happened, right? Next, Web APIs come with their own routing engine along with attribute based routing as well. What is routing? With MVC, we have seen this.
Different URLs.
Unique URLs for the actions within the same class so that we can easily identify which action is being requested, right? There are no physical resources, there are no physical handlers. Then we need to create a virtual URL which then is mapped to the right resource. That's where the routing and the endpoints help. Yes or no? Attribute based routing makes it even more easy and more flexible. Where while defining the action itself, we can generate the unique route for that action. Because looking at that action's implementation, we are always aware of which action we are actually looking to create the route for. Instead of having it placed in startup.cs or routeconfig.cs files separately. Make sense?
Yes.
Then it comes up with one of the MVC feature called as model binding. And along with that, it has got the built-in support for validations as well. While binding the model, it validates the data also, provided you have put the right configuration in place for validation. So if you remember in the last session, we used a statement where we checked if model state dot is valid. So what it does, it actually behind the scenes checks whether the model state is valid or not, or state of the model is valid or not in simple terms, as per our rules, correct? So it Web API framework has borrowed this from MVC. Another feature that it brings in is that it provides the flexibility to the client for requesting the data in their own desired format. So this feature is something what we call as content negotiation. Understand? I want to interact with the service, but I want to interact in my terms. You might be providing data in JSON format all the time, but my requirement is to get the data in XML format. I will also like to send the data to the server in XML format. Web API has got built-in support for this. I mean, built-in support for multiple formats where JSON and XML are available by default. You just need to put some configuration in place. JSON is the default format. XML is available, but it needs to be configured. And if any other custom format you are looking for, that custom format parser needs to be created and configured with your web API. Web API is flexible. You tell which format you want to use. Web API will support it. Like for some legacy systems, you might be looking for CSV or TSV formats also to be supported. Web API doesn't say no to it. It just says that I don't have a built-in parser for it or built-in processor for it. You create one and provide me. I am giving you the way using which you can provide me your own requirement or own customization. Understood? Yes.
Yes.
So it's not limited to XML and JSON, right? And what is the default format? JSON. XML is available but need to be configured. By default, it's not enabled. Next is media formatters. This basically work along with content negotiation feature. These are responsible for serializing and deserializing the data between the client and the server and supports various media types out of the box. If required, you can create your own custom media formatters also. So whether it is text slash JSON, text slash XML, or something else, text slash JavaScript, all the web standard formatters are already available out of the box. But then, as I said, if your application has got a different need, different format, probably that's where you might require the custom formatter to be created and configured. Web API is open for that also. So we can understand that Web API framework is quite flexible, right? And then at last, we have another feature called as filters. What are filters? This is another feature borrowed from MVC. These filters allow you to apply the cross-cutting concerns into your services like authentication authorization services, logging, exception handling with respect to the actions being invoked or requested. There are different categories of filters available, just like MVC. We have action filters, we have authorization filters, we have exception filters, and on the top, we can create custom filters also. Completely borrowed this feature from MVC because Web API has been built on the top of MVC only. Got my point? Yes.
Yes.
Here we said these are all key features of Web API.
Hello, Sakit.
Yes.
I think we have another one for the course, cross-origin research sharing. That one is also there.
That actually is not Web API specific. That's why I not listed it. It's more of a web standard that comes along with HTTP itself.
Okay.
Right? Web API is not responsible for it. It is something between the service provider, I mean your server, and your browser. And it is more of a browser implemented feature. Understand?
Okay.
Server says that whether the cross origin request should be processed or not, and browser decides whether to allow cross origin request to be sent or not. Understand?
All right.
Web API though contains something about it that is more of a configuration like input for server, right? Whether to support this or not at the server side. But again, it's not a Web API feature. It's more of a web standard feature. That's why I
Oh,
didn't list.
okay.
Okay. Let's talk about some of the benefits over here. Any benefits that you can share? First one, I'll list down over here flexibility and extensibility. We just discussed that many of the features allow us to provide the custom implementation also, right? Means the framework is flexible and extensible at all levels. Yes or no?
Yes.
Next is wide client support. What does it mean? Variety of clients are supported. As I said, whoever knows what is HTTP can just integrate with my API. Yes or no? because only HTTP request responses will be involved. Third, it leverages ASP.NET Platform. So makes the implementation even more simpler and provides all .NET, ASP.NET, and ASP.NET MVC features within it. We'll say integration with ASP.NET. For providing simple implementation, this is important. And if you're coming from ASP.NET background, it becomes even more simpler. You're aware of the ecosystem already. You can easily take advantage of the features, right? Like for authentication authorization, you can think of implementing ASP.NET identity into it. Correct? Then, because of loose coupling being put at the top priority at all levels, it by default provides me highly testable implementation. So I put this benefit as testability. Yes. Then being REST based, it provides me a stateless design. So that actually makes it further loosely coupled. And then versioning support also is provided, which helps me in evolving my services over the time. Right? Yes. Is it clear? Any questions? So now let's compare this with one of the very popular service-oriented architecture-based framework in .NET that allowed variety of services to be created for variety of clients. WCF. What were the advantages of WCF? Quite robust, quite stable framework it was. Built on the top of web services, enterprise services or Complus, remoting, and then the socket programming, and then MSMQ, etc. Provided multiple communication options for the same service. So depending on the type of the client, the different mode of communication was possible by configuring different endpoints. The different endpoints were possible to be configured with different bindings. Different bindings allowed us to use different communication protocols also, or transport protocols also. Plus, mode of communication was completely controllable, whether it was request response, one way, or duplex, right? It had built-in features for security, reliability, distributed transaction management, etc. But at the same time, we had some limitations, like the client's compatibility was not for all the type of clients across the world. These services were heavyweight services, again based on SOAP protocol, just like web services. Required lots of configuration to get set up and started. Developers were required to learn the complete config system for WCF. These services or this framework WCF was not specifically designed or tailored for creating the lightweight RESTful APIs, though WCF also had RESTful services creation feature into it, but that also required lots of configuration. So that's why we said it was not specifically optimized and designed for RESTful APIs. It was just one of the option into it, which actually resulted in some overhead work to be done by the developers in such scenarios. And because there was a completely complex configuration system, it had a very, very steep learning curve for the developers. If someone doesn't know WCF, it actually used to take some time for them to get used to the WCF ecosystem and the config system. Whereas if you look at web APIs, you just need to be good into the object-oriented programming and nothing else. Awareness of HTTP protocols, HTTP verbs is not mandatory. You can learn it over the time, and that's easy. If you already know it, that's good. That's added advantage. You will quickly adapt web APIs easily. Make sense? So if your target is web clients, where client of any type might be interacting, it may be smart device, very lightweight. It might be a complete computer system, desktop application. It can be a mainframe application. It can be a data center application. When this variety is there, best way forward is to go ahead with web APIs that allow you to create RESTful services pretty easily. Make sense? It's optimized for the HTTP channel. Okay. Now let's see how do we create our first web API. So start Visual Studio. Create new project. What template should I be selecting?
Core web page.
ASP.NET Core
ASP.NET
Web API.
Core Web API.
This goes with Web API 2.0 and later versions only. Next, let's name this as API underscore demo web API. I would like to change the folder instead of ASP.NET Core. I would like to put this in web APIs. So here I go with 3 dots, 1 level back, create new folder by the name web APIs. And I would like my project to be created here. Next, .NET 5 is the framework we'll be using. And just like web applications here, we have options for if you want to enable authentication. Individual option is not there because there is no UI here, right? So you have identity framework and Windows integrated security available along with none. And then HTTPS based communication, secure HTTP channel based communication by default. This is always a good idea these days. Then there is an option for whether you want to enable the open API support or not. So what is this open API? It's a replacement feature that actually replace WSDL. WSDL used to contain all your interfaces of your web services, right? SOAP services. Here you have the same thing available, but in JSON format. Pretty lightweight, pretty compact, pretty compressed. Okay. This is not mandatory, but yes, in case if you want, your clients to be provided with some client library or something by generating proxy classes and creating a library of it and sharing with your clients, then maybe you need this. It provides complete documentation of your API, also allows the developers to use the open API generated UI to test your web APIs within the browser itself, within the application context itself, which makes it very easy to develop and test your APIs, debug APIs. That's good. Basically, it uses a framework called as Swagger to generate all of your open API documentation and the UI based on that open API documentation. Very, very popular framework, Swagger. If you are looking to use some other framework like NSwag or anything else, in that case, don't enable this. Rather, using NuGet packages, you can enable it later on, which gives you the choice in your hands, like which documentation framework for Open API you want to be used. If you select this, it will by default use Swagger. You can see it here, right? Say create. Close this welcome page and see the folder structure. We don't have model. We don't have views here by default. Ideally, models can be here, but you will never find views in case of a web API project. Models and controllers is fine because there is no view. It's a service that has to be invoked by any UI, right? Rest everything is very much similar to what we saw in MVC. There is a sample API already created for us. So you can see under controllers, there is something called as weather forecast controller, for which there is a model class created weather forecast. Ideally, this should be put in a folder called as models. Let's do that. Right click on the project and say add new folder. Name the folder as models. And then drag and drop this weather forecast.cs file to this models folder and click OK. Yes. Make sure the namespace automatically gets updated here. If not, you can modify the namespace like this, your project name.models manually. So based on this model, that is your data structure, weather forecast, it is actually having a property called as date by of the type date time, which is about for which date the weather forecast is generated, temperature in Celsius, temperature in Fahrenheit. So there is a formula of converting Celsius to Fahrenheit, which is being used. And then the summary about what kind of weather it is. Right? Based on this, we have the API created here. So here also, if your weather forecast class is not accessible, make sure you have this namespace imported because we made some change. Right? Now here, if you see, we have some operation by the name get of type HTTP get. So whenever there is a HTTP get request being received by the base URL of this API, automatically this get method will be called. So 5 days weather forecast it is going to generate. Right now it is just some random data being generated, but I can connect this to some real weather station data also. Right? Weather station data, or maybe I can connect this to some analytical service as well, like maybe some machine learning algorithm or some data analytics algorithm, right? Let's run this. Just like MVC controller, if you see, weather forecast controller inherits controller, there is a route being configured. which says that base URL slash the controller name should be the request. There is no requirement of the action name to be mentioned because Web API works entirely on conventions. So by default, if the request is of type GET request, it will come here. If it is of post type, it will look for a method with HTTP post. Similarly, if it is a put request, it will look for a method HTTP put, and delete will look for HTTP delete. So here it runs. This is the Swagger UI created. By default, the URL is displayed here. The Swagger documentation you can see by clicking this link, equivalent of WSDL. And then if you click on this get button, it gives you the testing UI. Click on try it out. It says there is no input parameter being received or required. So I can directly click on execute. This is the request sent. This is the URL that was requested. Here is the response. Status code 200 means successful response. Here are the response headers. Right? And media type also displayed what type of output you can expect. By default, it is taking as text plain. Yes. Plus the data structures being used. The information about it is here. Weather forecast data structure has been used. What it has got: date, temperature C, temperature F, summary with their respective types. So I don't actually need to depend all the time on the tools like Fiddler or Postman or any equivalent tool, because if I've enabled Swagger, I can just do that testing right over here in the browser within my own application's context with minimum efforts. Yes or no?
Yes.
Easy it is, right? Meanwhile, you can see this is MVC controller only. What makes it an API? The API controller attribute. The route is being provided from here. The base URL is already mapped by default. Route is mapped from here. I said base URL is mapped by default. That's because of the configuration in startup. Here you can see we have map controllers, right? For endpoints. So that maps the base URL of the website automatically. Further to that, what needs to be mapped is decided by this attribute based routing. It makes it very, very flexible. Correct? And if you see the startup.cs, this is almost the same what we have seen in MVC application. Middleware is being configured here. The dependency services being configured here. The Swagger configuration is being done from here. If you didn't check that box, Open API support box, in that case, you will be required to add the package for Swagger explicitly. This one, swashbuckle.ASP.NET Core. And then this configuration you have to put in configure services, followed by these two things in configure method. So this will be required to be done manually in case if you didn't select that checkbox, or if there is any legacy API which doesn't have Swagger implemented into it, but now needs to use. You have to do this manually. Make sense?
Yes.
Same app settings.json is here, which will be used in a pretty similar manner. Same program.cs is there, the entry point of your application. So if you have understood MVC on .NET Core, understanding this setup is not very difficult, very different. It's the same thing. Got it?
Yes.
Okay, so let's take a break over here. We'll resume at 11:05 and we'll continue further with more complex API. The data-driven API will be looking to create at the end. But before that, a simple example we'll look at, which allows us to try out read-write operations. Here we have seen only read operation. So post, put, and delete also I want to explain, and then we'll go for the data-driven API. Yes.
Sure.
So I'll be back at 11:05. Okay. Hey guys, I'm back. Shall we proceed?
Yes.
Okay. So here, now we are looking for another sample API to be created, but from scratch this time to understand how exactly the APIs work. Okay. So for that, first of all, in the models folder, we'll say add a new class, let's say named as department DPD, quite similar to what we did for MVC application. Let's import couple of namespaces here using system dot component model dot data annotations followed by system dot component model dot data annotations dot schema. For now, I don't use the table attribute as I'm not immediately going to integrate with the entity framework or something. I just say here I have my first property of type integer by the name department number. Next one is string rename. Next one is string location. This I want to be behaving like primary key, so I make it key. Name should be required, and then I want its string length to be set to a maximum of 50 characters with a minimum length of 3 characters. I can merge two attributes like this, and then location to have max length of 50 with no minimum length. Quite similar to what we did, right? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So once this is done, let's close that tab. And now I want a controller to be created. So right click on controller folder and say add controller. So it'll be in add new scaffolded item dialog, right?
Yes.
Which option should we be selecting? Of course, MVC is
Hello.
not the option because this will create the regular MVC controller. We are looking for a web API controller to be created. So on the left hand side, first of all, select API. Okay. Then here we have options like API controller empty. So it will have just one sample method created, but that's not what we are looking for. We don't have entity framework setup as well. So the remaining option is API controller with read write action. Let's select this and click add. Let's name this as departments controller. add. Done. Is it done? Let's import a namespace. System dot collections dot generic, followed by your project name dot models. And then some changes. So here, if you see, the basic configuration is already in place. This controller will now be available at base path slash API slash departments. I already have two get methods, one post method, one put method, one delete method, right? Definitely the kind of code that we have in these methods is not what we will be looking for. Here I'm not looking for IEnumerable of string to be written. I'm looking for IEnumerable of department type to be written instead. Department collection is what I want. And probably to have this department collection created over here, I'll say private, static, read only, list of department by the name departments to be declared as new list. And I want to use the collection initializer over here. So I remove semicolon from the end, put curly brace here instead, and say new department. With object initializer, I initialize some records. So department number equals 10, comma, dname equals HRD, comma, location equals, let's say Pune, comma, 5 records total I'll put. So I just paste it 4 more times and make changes 20, 30, 40, 50. Names being changed to finance, R&D, production, sales. Let this be Mumbai. Let this one be Bengaluru. Hyderabad, Chennai, and then remove comma at the end here and put semicolon after the curly brace. And this is what the list I want to return from here. I just say return departments. List implements IEnumerable already, so I need not do any typecasting over here, right? What this get should do. See here also there is an attribute which has got some route template, which is basically for route parameter. Anything that goes in curly brace is a route parameter. It will be appended to this. So base URL slash API slash departments is the URL till here slash whatever the integer value goes in here will be mapped to this int ID. I can actually say this is supposed to be an int. This is something where I put route constraint, right? I say ID to be received, but ultimately ID is supposed to be of type int. So if I try to put some data which is not int, it will not be accepted. Okay. What it should return is a single object of department type. So I change return type to department. And then what I should return is the result returned by departments dot find. D as in department goes in D dot department number equal to ID. If the match found, that record will be returned. If the match not found, it will just return null. Maybe to simplify this and make it more elaborated, I can rewrite the same code as this, where department is equals to departments dot find D as in department goes in D dot department number equal to ID. Then I check if department is equals to null. Return not found, which will return HTTP status code 404. Otherwise, return the department. Now, to return not found, I need to have this return type changed. So here I'll say this should be action result of type department. That way, without typecast, I can return this. Action result will contain status code, and if there is data, that data will also go in. It's quite simplified, right? I told you that you just need to know some object-oriented programming and HTTP verbs to understand APIs. There is nothing else required. Yes or no? So the learning curve is very small, not very steep, almost flat. Yes or no? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Next, I'm looking for a department object to be received when I post. So here I say department DBT. From body means it will be taken from the request body. Now, if it is a complex object, actually this is optional. Complex objects will always be taken from body of the request only. But if it is a primitive type, it may come from route parameter, from query string, from body. That's where we require the explicit attribute which tells the system from where to look for the value. For a complex object, whether I put this or not, it will always be taken from body because complex object cannot come into the query string parameter or the route parameter, right?
So, can I ask
Yeah,
question? So,
yeah.
if it's automatically retrieved from the body, so why this attribute is
Just for
required?
the
It's
readability. Just
oh,
I said it is optional. Means
okay,
whether you put it or not, that's okay. And this is advisable to put because it makes your code more readable. No one will
okay,
ask question from where the value will be picked up, right?
okay.
It's visible. By reading code, anyone can understand it. So it's good. Though it is not mandatory, it's good. I say departments.add department, and most likely because I'm adding to in-memory collection, there will be no error. But in case if there is an error, what then? So I'll just modify the code to check if model state is valid or not. Right. So I'll say if model state, which is a built-in property, dot is valid. Then departments dot add department, and I'll say return. This I'll say is action result as return type. What it returns is return created at action, that actually automatically returns status code 201. Action name, let's say, is in okay, so instead of created at, I can say, wait, just a moment. Created at action, usually we use an MVC. So just one moment, I'll just get the right one over here for the API.
I guess created at root will be here.
Yeah. I'm also looking for the status code if we can directly return that itself. So created at route will do that automatically, but let's see. If we get a better option, that will be good.
I think we can return status codes dot okay.
OK will be representing 200, right? So when you say 200, that is usually expected with get request and delete request. For post, we usually want 201 as the
Yeah,
status code.
I think status codes does have the all the status codes. If we can use status codes dot created, I think that
Yeah, but then that will require my return type to be HTTP status code, not action result. That is another thing.
okay.
Okay, for now, I'll just go with created at route. I'll just check if better option is there. Okay, so let's put it this way. Created at route. Route name will not be useful here. Let me put department dot department number as route data, comma, object value is department object itself. Else, I'll return bad request with the message invalid department data.
Saket, I
Yeah,
meant this one. I sent in the chat, so this
yeah,
would
yeah.
work.
Yeah, so bad request is a wrapper on HTTP status code. And if you see, it returns object result, right?
Yeah.
Now, object result is action result actually. Whereas status code itself, if you send back directly, in that case, that will require HTTP status code as the return type. Okay.
Okay.
So at the end, it is status code only, but
Yep.
this status code can carry the data also. That's why action result is needed. That's it.
Okay.
Okay. Now the similar thing we will be required to do in put as well. Put takes in a route parameter ID, has got a method by the name put that returns action result. of type department. ID is department number, and from body I'll say it picks up the modified department object. So department. This I'll copy. If model state dot is valid, and before that I want to check if ID is same as department dot department number or not. So I'll say if ID equal department dot department number. If they are same, or let's check for non-equality here. We'll go for negative condition. If not, ID not equal to department dot department number, let's rewrite this completely. I'll just remove this. I'll say return bad request here. Department number is invalid. Then I check if yeah, to be on the safe side, I need to check it in nullable way. If department is not null, then check the department number. If it is null, the condition will be false already. Then I check if model state dot is valid, and I'll check for negative condition. So not model state dot is valid. Then also return bad request with message invalid department data. Then I check I retrieve the department to be modified first. So where department or old department equals departments dot find by department dot department number. Yeah, this needs to be a lambda expression. So find D as in department goes in D dot department number equal department dot department number. Here I check if old department is null, return not found. Else simply I say old department dot dname equals department dot dname. Old department dot location equals department dot location. Here for this merge activity, you can use automapper if required. And then I say return what's that action? Two 204 is what we are looking for. So what we can do is Okay, let me try this way. Instead of action result, I make it I action result. Return. Here I can try returning status code. HTTP status code. Dot no content. Resolve the namespace for HTTP status code system.net. What's wrong here? Should be fine. As it's an enum, this should be integer only. Okay, let's try putting this as converted. Okay. And then delete operation that takes an ID as the parameter. So we just say, we do basic checks here like this one. We need to find the record to be deleted, whether it exists or not. If not, we return not found. So I can say this is action result or I action result. I can make it I action result also. Return not found if not found. Instead of department dot department number, I'll pass ID. And if it exists, I want to get it removed. So I'll just say departments dot remove all department. And then I can say return. Okay. So I can just return okay, or if I want the object to be returned as well, I can just say it is this old department object which was deleted. In case if someone wants to provide undo operation, can provide that from here if the object is returned, right? What we'll do now to test this is in get, we'll put a breakpoint. Here also we'll put the get breakpoint in get by ID. Then in post, put and delete. Okay, let's start. Swagger will automatically detect our new API. We need not do anything for it, which it has. I have all my operations listed over here. Get is the first get method that returns me the collection. This get is written by ID, then post, put and delete. Let's try this get first. There is no parameter to it, route parameter to it. So I can directly say try it out and execute. I should get the list ideally. What it says, constraint reference int could not be resolved. Okay. No worries. I'll just get this removed for now. Get, try, execute. So it comes over here. Which get? Without parameters. Return depth. So whatever the collection we have created here will be returned. And this list we should be able to see in the response. And we are able to. Success 200 code. Then I say Go for the second get, try it out. I want to search the department with department number 20. Execute. So it comes to this get. 20 comes to ID from this binding. It finds the department. I'll just use F10 here. Department is found. It's not null. So it bypasses if and returns the department. I'll just say continue. And the record should be displayed here. I get this copied. Then I collapse this get, this get. I want to modify that record. So I just say put, try it out. I want to modify department number 20. So I put 20 here and the schema I change to what I copied with department name being changed to finance and legal. Execute. It goes to put. ID contains 20, department contains complete object. The condition matches over here. So it proceeds. It's not equal to, so it doesn't match there, rather. It proceeds to check if model state is not valid. It's valid, so it bypasses this as well. Finds the department, checks if it is not null. Most likely it won't be because the department with department number 20 is there. So it bypasses this if statement as well. Gets department name and location modified and returns the status code to us. So it should be 204. Right? And we can check this by going back once again to this get by ID. I'll just say execute this time. Continue. And I should be able to see the modified data. Right? Similarly, here I want to delete this. Delete. Try it out. Department 20 is I want to delete. Execute. Same way, it just checks if department number exists or not. It does exist, removes it and returns OK. I say continue. It gets deleted, status code is 200 and response body is this. So in case if some client application wants to undo this operation, can consume this object and re-add it. If I go to the first get method now and say execute, continue, I should be able to see only 4 records. 20 is missing. I want to re-add it. So I say post, try it out. Department number 20, rename finance, location Mumbai, execute. Checks if it is valid or not. It is. So it proceeds and adds to the collection and returns the route. Continue. So we get status code 201. This is the record which is created. And the URL also must be visible in the response where it is created, right? And then we can go back and check this. We should have all the 5 records once again back. Department number 20 also added. Yes. Proper CRUD operations in work. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
The only thing is we are not dealing with databases here, right?
Right.
Nothing special required. It just requires the same efforts what we did to make use of entity framework core and integrate with SQL Server or in-memory provider or any other provider. So you can actually try out that solution we'll be looking at in the next session. But before the next session, if you want to try it out, you can just do that. You can modify this code itself to make it work with SQL Server as backend or in-memory provider in the backend with Entity Framework Core, right?
Yes.
Only one difference you will see here. The controller is not returning views at all. It focuses on returning status codes and data. Am I right? Here also, instead of returning department, I can say return OK and department. So status code 200 and the response body contains department into it. This means that. Clear? Like what we did here. So that's the right behavior for a web API or RESTful API. Is it fine?
Yes.
Okay, for today, this is it, as we need to spend some time on the assessment as well. You have 2 to 3 minutes. Just see if you have any questions. Meanwhile, I'll just get the link for the assessment, online assessment.
Hello. Yeah, I
Yeah.
have one question. So
Yes, go ahead.
we have put operation as well, right? HTTP put.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we can do same operation with the post as well. What
We
actually
can.
when we
Yes.
then
So delete also is possible with post itself. But then if you look at the definition of the HTTP verbs, basically they have got some context these days provided to them, right? Post is recommended for insert, put is recommended for update, delete is recommended for delete. Basically, to make it more clearly understandable to the end user, that if you are looking for update operation, the request has to be put. So it is by standards, not by rules. Okay.
okay.
Okay, because if post itself can do everything, it might create confusion, right? Someone who is coming from the background where he has been told that post is for insert, put is for update, he will get confused, right?
Okay.
So that's why you should have a proper mapping over there. Though even get operation is possible with post, or everything is possible with get also. But then there are specific ways. It
Just
initially started with only get and post, right? Few years back, if we go 20, 25 years back, it was only get and post.
so just to segregate the
Absolutely.
options. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Just like we have different team members with different titles, right? Though with DevOps and Agile coming in, everyone is capable of doing everything, or everyone is expected to do everything. You develop, you test, you deploy, and you maintain. That's what is expected these days. But still, we do have teams with different roles to just make the communication easy, right?
Right.
So this is my QA team, this is my DevOps team, this is my developer team. That's not required mandatorily, but we do that just to make people answerable, right?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Got it.
Okay, so here I'm just sharing the link for the test. The duration of the test is 30 minutes and it has got total 40 multiple choice questions. So wishing you best of luck for the same. Easy and very to the point questions are there. Just wanted to find out how much of the things we discussed you remember, right? So the final assessment will be a little bit more complex. Okay. I've shared the link. Just see if you all are able to access it.
Here in my form it says start from 2, question number from 2 to 41.
Yeah, that's just a simple input. Like the first question is not actually question; it is asking for the name.
Okay, that's why I thought
Yeah.
my
So
machine was okay.
actual question starts from question number 2, sequence
Okay.
number 2, I will say.
Yeah, okay. So we can start, right?
Yes, you can. So just have a look at the screen. This screen looks like this when you click the link, and when you say start now, this is the screen which just gives you some guidelines. When you say click to start, it starts with, first of all, your name being entered and then the actual test. So that's why the input was like it starts from question 2. Okay.
Clear. Yep. Thank
So
you.
put your name as per what is there on your ID card, so that the report will be created. And at the end, within parentheses, put your employee ID also. I mean number.
Okay.
So like this, Saket Karne. And let's say my employee ID is 1078. So I'll put 1078 here. Okay.
Yep.
Once you're done, just submit your exam, and in the chat box, you can put done as well.